So much for trying to sneak quietly into the room. Yeah, it just didn't work this morning. Any of you that are coming from the west this morning are probably just arriving the same time as Garth and I. So it was a little bit of a snag in the traffic this morning. So I do want to thank each and every one of you for being here. It is great to be able to join you finally today about an issue I think is emerging. It's an issue that I don't think people have paid a whole lot of attention to in the past, and I don't mean just people that are involved in health and safety. I mean, as a society, we've kind of avoided the issue of mental illness in the past. We didn't want to talk about it. It was an uncomfortable discussion. I think over the past decade, I've probably seen it emerge as a political issue in a way that I've seen very few other political issues emerge. And things move very, very slowly in politics. But this issue has moved at lightning speed. People have gone from not wanting to talk about it, from not feeling they had permission to talk about it, to having very comfortable conversations about the issue around mental illness. Of course, when you think about people, when you think about our lives, we spend more than half our waking hours at work with our colleagues. We spend more time with our colleagues at work than we do with our own families often, except for the weekends. So it would make sense that the mental health in the workplace would become an issue that society would be asked to deal with, and that various jurisdictions and governments would be asked to deal with. So I really want to express my support this morning to OCAL for just hosting this event, for just having this event, for just being prepared to move that discussion further, because the partnership we have with OCAL is something that we've truly valued over the years. And the partnership is really critical to allow us to move forward on some of the emerging issues. And I really thank you for the commitment that you've shown to this issue in particular. And health and safety has evolved over the years. I go back to a report I remember being done by the CME, the Canadian Manufacturers and Exporters. They produced a workbook early in the 2000s. And really, I think what it said to business was it's the right thing to do, but it's also the profitable thing to do. It also makes business sense. If you look at health and safety from all perspectives, you'll realize that it's no coincidence that the good businesses that have a robust health and safety program within their organizations also happen to be the most profitable, the most productive. They become an employer of choice. They're able to retain the talent they have. All the things you would want to have in a business evolve as a result of your commitment to health and safety. Well, exactly the same business case applies to psychological health and safety as well. And it was a bit of a coincidence, and with nothing else to do in my 50s, I decided I'd complete my master's. And at the same time, I was chairing the select committee on mental health and addictions for the province, which was a real learning experience for me because I didn't realize what was happening in my own community. I think that most elected officials would say the same thing, that there was things happening under the surface in their own community, on their own streets, to their neighbors, to their friends. People were dealing with things in their own way and dealing with it very, very quietly, being ashamed to talk about it. But then I had a number of visits to my constituency office in Oakville from parents specifically, and they were coming forward. They were telling me that their son or their daughter was dealing with either a mental illness or was dealing with an addictions issue, or sometimes both at the same time, and they couldn't get services in the province of Ontario, and they'd suffered enough on their own, and they just were frustrated, and they wanted the government to do something about it. And this just wasn't happening in my constituency office in Oakville. This, as it turns out, was happening throughout the province of Ontario, which led to the creation of the Select Committee on Mental Health and Addictions. And as I said, at the same time, I was just completing my MBA. I had a final paper to write, and I decided I'd focus on mental health in the workplace because it struck me that the place where you spend, as I said, almost half, sometimes over half your waking hours, that all the things we were talking about that were happening in our families, in our homes, in our communities would be happening equally as strongly in our workplaces as well. And of course, the evidence is true. The evidence just jumps off the page that those smart companies, those smart firms that latch onto this idea early and implement a robust preventative system of which is emerging. I know that there's some people speaking today on this issue. The same business case that applies to physical health and safety applies, and perhaps even more, applies to psychological health and safety and well-being. So we know more than ever that mental health challenges affect not only those that are suffering from them, but also the families, our co-workers, and employees. Now, today, as I stand here today, about a quarter of the country's working population is currently affected by mental health concerns in one way or another. As I stand here today, most of you will know that there's a 500,000 Canadians that aren't at work today. It's a staggering number, and they're not at work because they hurt themselves. They're not at work because they're dealing with occupational illness. They're not at work, 500,000 of them aren't at work because they're dealing with mental health issues. I think that the impact on the economy is just staggering. There's a man that I've got to know, his name is Bill Howlett. He writes in the Globe quite often and really puts the business case forward. He does some work for Morneau Chappelle, I think, as well. But he really puts the business case forward for being smart about this issue. And what Bill says is that if you've got a workforce of 5,000 people, you're probably getting productivity out of about 3,200 of those people. And his question to business, other than do you want to do the right thing, is do you want to get productivity out of 1,800 people? You're paying for 5,000. It would be nice if you got productivity out of 5,000 as well. So the business case just jumps right off the page. And in Ontario, in collaboration with partners like OCAL, we're hoping to lead that change. So as we commemorate Mental Health Week, we're reminded about how much mental illness really impacts us all. It's got psychological health and safety as wide-reaching implications for the workplaces, and that's why we've just got to recognize it as key to a healthy workplace. We find that those employers that look after their workers as well as their bottom line are organizations that are going to succeed. For our part, what we've done as a government is I think we've made some real progress in advancing workplace mental health in Ontario. We passed some legislation that impacts specifically on our first responders in the province last year. It's just about a year ago today. And we realized that our first responders were having to go through an almost torturous process in order to get WSIB coverage. And we also knew that that was happening in the face of very clear evidence that the sooner you identified post-traumatic stress disorder and the sooner that you got treatment for post-traumatic stress disorder, the much improved the outcome was. Instead, these people were languishing, trying to prove beyond a shadow of a doubt that the post-traumatic stress disorder came from some event that happened to them in their role as a first responder. We figured that the better way of doing that would be to make that presumptive, to assume that you're a corrections officer, you're a firefighter, you're a police officer, or you are a paramedic, and that we're going to assume that the post-traumatic stress disorder, unless there's something glaring that jumps off the page, we're going to assume that it happened in the course of your work, and we're going to get you into treatment as quickly as we possibly can. But we also said to the first responder community, given the prognosis, and people tell me, experts, I do listen to experts, people tell me that at this point in time, that for the most part, post-traumatic stress disorder is incurable, that we don't have a cure for it yet. You can manage it well, you can deal with it, you can live a significant life while dealing with post-traumatic stress disorder, but you're always dealing with it in some way. Faced with that outcome, I think it's one thing to say to people, if you get hurt, if you end up with post-traumatic stress disorder, we'll treat you with dignity and respect. That's one thing, that's the right thing to do. But knowing that it's incurable at this point in time, and I do hope that changes, but knowing that at this point in time it's incurable, I think it's also incumbent upon us as employers, as a society, to try to do everything we possibly can to ensure that you don't get post-traumatic stress disorder in the first place. We prefer not to deal with it. So a little not talked about part of what we did for first responders when it comes to post-traumatic stress disorder was we said to the employers, we need you to file a prevention plan with the Ministry of Labour. And we gave them a year to do it, and that year expired on April 23rd. So I'm assuming all the plans are in my office somewhere, and I can't wait to read them. But it's not so much that I read them. What I wanted employers to pay attention, to at least sit down for a few hours or a few days or a few weeks and talk about post-traumatic stress disorder. I wanted to take advantage of the competitive nature of first responders. Any of you that have done any work in the first responder community will know that the police are always trying to outdo the firefighters, and the firefighters are always trying to outdo the paramedic, and nobody in the first responder community wants to have the worst PTSD prevention plan. So what I said was, I'm going to publicize them. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to put them all online, and the smallest fire department in Northern Ontario will have access to the same prevention plan as the largest police services in Toronto, for example. So that expertise will be shared around the province. Everybody will be able to avail themselves of the best practices in each one of the jurisdictions. We also, in the budget, very quietly, unveiled plans to ensure that workers that develop chronic mental stress are entitled to benefits and services that are provided by the WSIB. Benefits for injured workers have long been a priority of this government, and we're committed to making sure we treat all injured workers with fairness, dignity, and respect. In the past, traumatic mental stress was covered, but it really became very, very clear to us as a result of some appeals and some challenges to that policy that it would not withstand a constitutional challenge, and it was time to face the reality that chronic mental stress is just as destructive and is just as significant as that traumatic mental stress. So you're going to see that change very, very soon, because that chronic mental stress is a reality for simply too many workers. They deserve the benefits, they deserve the supports that are already afforded to those workers that suffer from traumatic mental stress. So I've got a bunch of notes that are saying pretty well what I've been saying to you, but I didn't want to really just come here and rhyme off a few notes, because this is an issue that I think we're breaking some new ground on. It's exciting, and I want you to feel excited about it. What I'm excited to announce today is another initiative. It's a 1-hour webinar that's open to any organization that wants to learn about the importance of workplace mental health. It's going to be hosted by the Workplace Safety and Prevention Services. It's happening on May the 30th of this year, and it's going to show people exactly how to implement the national standard to help their organization promote mental health and prevent psychological harm in the workplace. I know that many of our partners are continuing their work on promoting good psychological health, whether it's offering workshops to thousands of workers or establishing those very important networks that advance mental health through community and business leaders. Throughout our grant programs, we've invested another $1.5 million to support workplace mental health. My ministry, for example, the Ministry of Labour, invested in a project to promote workplace wellness in Ontario's retirement homes by simply providing training modules on mental health and on injury prevention. Another grant that we awarded that may not have been awarded in the past, that we may have skipped over in the past, there's an organization called Mindful Employers Canada. And I think they provide training and support for up to 25 nonprofit organizations that are going to help them promote and protect worker mental health and safety. So I think we all have a role to play in making our workplaces healthier. So during this mental health week, it'd be great if we could talk to each other, great if we could learn from each other, reflect a little bit on how far we've come, and engage on the issues surrounding mental health. Starting the conversation is always that difficult first step. There's a way to do it right, and there's a way to do it wrong, and I think we know from best practices the things that work and the ones that don't. But I think we all must it's not just a feel-good initiative. It's not just something where we're trying to make each other feel good, like we're trying to do the right thing. It really is a critical matter that's going to have an impact not only on our lives and ourselves, but on our family members' lives, on our co-workers and their families. One thing, when I was chairing the Select Committee on Mental Health and Addictions, that I didn't expect to hear. I knew I'd hear from psychiatrists, from psychologists, for those that are employed in the field of mental health. And I thought perhaps I might hear from some people that actually had lived experience, which we did. I didn't realize up until that date the impact that mental health has on those people in the family, on the caregivers, on the people that are left standing in the hospital emergency room when their loved one has gone into a private room with a doctor, and the two of them have walked out and said, well, just take him home. So, well, what happened? Well, I can't tell you. He asked that I not share it with you. And the way that these families were just languishing with the realization that something was wrong, They were going to have to deal with the repercussions of it, but they weren't entitled to the information. And it's just those difficult situations that you realize that families have been suffering for years and years, and we can do something about that. And it would be criminal not to do something about that. When we can bring the resources and the expertise that we have to bear, because the one thing that became very apparent is that no one's immune to this. Mental illness doesn't favor a certain income group or a certain strata of society. It's one that just pervades all levels of society. I'm asking you to make mental health a priority. I want you to go to work every day knowing exactly what you need to do to build that psychologically healthy workplaces. If you don't know, I encourage you to reach out and to find and to learn from each other. Ontario is still one of the, and increasingly so, is one of the best places in the world you can possibly work. It's one of the safest places you can possibly work in the world. If we're going to keep it that way, we must all know our roles and do our part. I'm really proud of the progress we've made when it comes to health and safety in the province of Ontario in the past decade. We've chopped incidents almost in half. We've reduced incidents by about 50%. That's something that we should all congratulate each other for doing that. That hasn't been the government. It hasn't been any one individual. It's been workers. It's been employers. It's been government. It's been health and safety organizations all working together to achieve that. We should be proud of that, but we shouldn't be satisfied for 1 second. We shouldn't, feel that we've got to a point and let's stay at that point. We need to get better at it. I tell people I love being the Minister of Labor, and I do. It's a job that I've always wanted. It's a job I enjoy doing. There's one rotten part of that job, and that's about once a week I get a phone call telling me that somebody who went to work that morning isn't going home in the evening. And it's such a normal thing. We all leave work in the morning. Everybody in this room, I'm assuming for the most part, walked out into a driveway this morning or walked into an underground parking lot or got on a bus or jumped in a car and ended up here. And the expectation is that somewhere around 5 or 6 or 7 o'clock, we go back there. Very normal day. And you think what happens, and I know that some of you have experienced this because of the work you're involved in, when that doesn't happen. So the shock of that happening is something that I can only imagine the impact that runs through the families. So my aim is to make Ontario the most psychologically safe place to work in the world. I think if we aspire to that, I think the competitive economic advantage that's not talked about yet is something that we'll be happy we did. I think employers already look to Ontario as a place to invest. When they look to North America, when foreign direct investors look to this continent, they look to the state of California and they look to the province of Ontario as the two places they prefer to invest. Because of the skilled workforce we have here, it's because I think of the stable government we have here. But wouldn't it be nice if we could add to that list? And we could have employers from other jurisdictions say, I want to invest in Ontario because it's the most psychologically safe place to work. Instead of getting productivity out of 3,200 of 5,000 people, they're getting productivity out of 4,500. That type of thing is what drives investment. Something that it's one of those win-win situations where you do the right thing and you profit as a result of it. That's what I'd like to see happen in the province of Ontario. I want to thank each and every one of you that's taken some time out of your day to make sure that we deal with this issue in the right way. Some of the faces are familiar here. It's great to see you guys. Some of the faces I haven't met yet. But I wish you a very productive day. Thank you for having me. My apologies for being late, and my apologies for arriving a little stressed out myself.
Thank you, Minister Flynn.